Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvellously well. We're big, we're bad, and we're back with Mr. Jerry Hammock. Jerry, how are you?
Doing good, Warren. It's great to see you again.
This is good. What we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is we're going to go down the list of all the Beatles albums. So we decided we would start, of course, at the beginning, which of course would be Please, Please Me. Do we want to go track by track down this, or do we want to do the 4 tracks that came out first? The singles, obviously, Love Me Do, P.S. I Love You, and Please, Please Me, and what is it, Ask Me Why?
Yep.
So what about that? Should we start off with the singles and then get into the album?
I think it makes sense, Warren, because the singles obviously were what allowed them to do the albums in the first place. They wouldn't have got the chance to do the album if the singles hadn't been as successful as they were. So why not start with Love Me Do? Number 17 on the UK charts, if I remember.
Correct. I remember that's etched indelibly into my mind, a number 17 hit on the charts.
Before we get going on talking about each song, let's talk about the studio setup at EMI Recording Studios. I've got notes for all of this stuff. There's a lot to remember, so bear with me. The Beatles primarily worked in Studio 2, but they also worked in Studio 3 during this era. Studio 2 had the Red 37 console during this era. Studio 3 with a Red 51. They were recording to both mono with the British tape recorder, or BTR2, as well as, and primarily to, twin track, which was the quarter-inch BTR3, EMI BTR3. There were 4 tracks on site, but during this era, they weren't using them. The Mixdown machines were also the BTR2s and BTR3s. For outboard signal processing, they used the RS-114 limiter. They used the Altec RS-124 compressor, the RS-127 presence box, the RS-144 4-way premixer, which gave them some more inputs to the console. They also had a RS-158, which was a modified Fairchild 666 compressor. And then they had a specialized equalizer, which was the RS-92 Neumann mic equalizer, and various plug-in boxes. The effects that they were using in the era included echo chamber, also included half-speed recording, and some use of tape echo and repeat echo. For those that are really interested, the control room monitors that they were using during this era were the Altec 605As. On the floor, they had what was called the White Elephant, which was RLS-10, and it was comprised of a Leak power amplifier with a Wharfedale 15-inch speaker, and it was in a big white enclosure, and they'd wheel that around for on-the-floor monitoring. For microphones, the Neumann U47, U48s got so much use through this era. They're used in pretty much everything. Vocals, acoustic guitars. They were used on piano. For the bass amplifier during this era, they were using an STC 4033A, and then the drums were utilizing 2 microphones for their recording, an STC 4038 as an overhead, and then a 4033A for the kick drum. Later in the era, they moved to an AKG D20 for that. So that's the primary studio setup that was going on. So the Beatles were recording for this album in mono and 2-track. And yet they were still doing overdub. So how was that done? With mono, the way that would work would be you would record your basic track, and it could be the full band even, with vocals and everything, onto the mono BTR2 machine. And now if I want to do additional work to it, what I do is I send that signal from that first tape machine to another mono tape machine. And as I'm sending that signal in, I'm now recording on top of it onto a new mono tape. So that's mono to mono superimposition recording, as they called it in the days. We call it overdubs today. With twin track, I've got the twin track BTR 2 or BTR3 machine. With that machine, I could record the backing track, let's say on track 1, and do my overdubs or superimpositions on track 2. That's one way. However, if I've done the initial recording across both tracks of the twin track, then once again, I send that twin track signal to another twin track machine. And as I'm sending the signal to it, I'm simultaneously recording my overdubs on top of it. I can record them to one or both channels of the twin track. And that's how it was done for the Please Please Me era.
So can you let us know what are the key differences between the Red 37, the Red 51, the J37, and what was the tape machine?
And a M10 or a T9U Telefunken machines. The differences are not anything that anyone would notice in terms of the sound. The Red 37 console was in use all throughout the Beatles' career. It ended up in Studio 3 had one and remained with one. They just upgraded Studio 2 to the Red 51. Just a little bit, a little different preamps. The Red 37 was using an earlier preamp, and then the Red preamps ended up in the 51 board. So that's the primary difference. Not anything that anyone's going to like really hear. And the same with the 4-track machines. The T9U, which ended up being used for a lot of mobile applications at EMI, was just a solid 4-track machine, and the M10 found use on a lot of recordings throughout the years at EMI, again, before they made the move to the Studers.
And both 1-inch tape format?
Both were 1-inch, both were 1-inch 4-track machines, exactly. Think of all that room for saturation. That's kind of, it's kind of great, right? 1/4 inch of saturation per track. That's I think why a lot of these signals stood up so well, why the recordings stood up so well. You just had a lot of tape to saturate, could get a really quality signal on them.
Yep, a lot of real estate. I couldn't help but notice that George Martin wasn't the producer on P.S. I Love You. It was Ron Richards.
Yeah, Ron Richards was a house producer at EMI, and he did the initial work on the session. The Beatles were not a proven act. They were another in a stable of recording artists hoping to make it on Parlophone. So did they need George Martin, who was the label head, as well as the lead producer for the label? Did they need him? I can see why they would say no, not yet. Martin was obviously aware. Martin checked in on the early session, but Ron Richards could do the job. Why not have him do the job? That's the way it is with a lot of these things. Until you know better, until this act has warranted that you are going to pay attention to them, good, competent producing and engineering is going to do the trick.
On these songs, we're talking live takes with what kind of level of overdubs?
Not much. And when we get into the song-by-song breakdowns, you'll see that they were very few takes, very few overdubs. So super efficient sessions. And in some cases, with the songs on the Please Please Me album, the songs were completed within one take. An example of that we'll talk about coming up is the lead song for the album, I Saw Her Standing There. Take one is the take for that. There's a little studio magic that we'll talk about too, but
well, why don't we do
take one?
Let's talk about it. Let's go down the album now. So, as you were saying, track 1, side 1 is I Saw Her Standing There. My memories of this, apart from being a beautiful song, but I remember reading, Paul was saying that this was predominantly his song, but John had done some lyrical changes. And what was it? The lyric ended up as she was just 17, you know what I mean. But it originally started off as she was just 17, never been a beauty queen, I think, wasn't it?
I think you're close on that.
Yeah.
This aspect of the Beatles' history, I'm, in full disclosure, I don't keep up with it. But there were some changes on that. This was a song that dated back as well to their Hamburg days. They were playing this song at the Star Club. So this is a song that had been in their repertoire for a while. A lot of the songs on Love Me Do, on the Please Please Me album were songs that they had perfected in their live act. The idea of the whole album was to capture the essence of their live performances that they were doing in Germany and in Liverpool. The overdubs for that were simply hand claps.
Really?
And that was it. Now, the studio magic for it was that on take 9 of 9 takes that they did for the track, on take 9, it opened with the 1, 2, 3, 4 that we hear on the record. So the finished record with the overdubs of hand claps is take 1, but the count in is from take 9. So that's an edit. top of it's take 9, and then we go to take 1.
Which is, for me, counterintuitive. You'd think that the first time you ever played it, you do a 1, 2, 3, and the more you played it, the more used to the groove you would be. So it's funny, but maybe they wanted to, it's a great way to introduce an album by a band that was then going to become the biggest band in the world.
Absolutely. And, Beatle fans know that then later in their career, when it came to Revolver, they aped that a little bit with the very slow 1, 2, 3, 4 count in for Taxman. So kind of a nice echo to the past.
Yeah, I remember.
So as I mentioned, I've got notes here because there's so much information that I've got to share with you guys about these albums, and I don't want to miss a trick. So thank you for being patient with my lack of eye contact in certain sections. I Saw Her Standing There was the second song recorded in that massive February 11th session where the session itself was 12 hours and 45 minutes. This is the second track recorded, ended up being the first track on the album. The backing track had McCartney on bass and lead vocals, Lennon on electric guitar and backing vocals, Harrison also on his duo jet, and Starr on drums. They did 2 complete backing tracks of the song, and take 1 was considered to be the best. Martin at that point thought he might be able to coax a little bit better solo out of Harrison, and so did some edit pieces with the solo to see if he could make that happen. And, how do you improve on the solo that we all know and love? You couldn't, and he recognized that. They did move on for a couple more complete tracks, and the last one being take 9. And while it was good, it didn't match take 1. Although there was a piece of it, as we talked about earlier, that they ended up using when it came time for the mix. Beyond that, now they had 1 overdub on the song, and that was hand claps, and that was as of take 12. When they're doing overdubs in this era, they keep adding to the take number. It isn't like an overdub to the backing track, which would be, for instance, superimposition 1 to take 5. They just keep adding up the tracks. So as you see the track numbers get bigger in this era, it means that they've just done more work and more work and more work, and it's all cumulative. So now up to take 12, they've added hand claps across the entire song, and the recording's done. So now we jump to February 25th. And what happens then is there's an edit of take 9 and take 12. Take 9 being the one where we've got McCartney's count in, the 1, 2, 3, 4, and take 12 being the balance of the entire track with the hand claps. And that ended up being the release version of the song, both the mono and the stereo versions.
So next up on the album is Misery, another Lennon and McCartney composition. I've read somewhere that, just out of interest, that this is actually the first song the Beatles wrote that was covered by another artist. I think it was Kenny Lynch covered this in '63. So pretty amazing. There you go. Second song on their first album, and already people are recognizing them as great songwriters and covering their songs.
Misery was the 5th song that was recorded in this gigantic February 11th marathon recording session. It was originally intended for UK teen idol, 16-year-old Helen Shapiro, but her manager turned down the track. Mercifully for us, the Beatles knew that they had a great song there, and they recorded it themselves. The backing track had Lennon on the Gibson J160E acoustic guitar and lead vocals, McCartney on bass and lead vocals, Harrison on the duo jet, and Starr on drums. It took 11 takes to get the backing track correct, but they nailed it. And then that was that for the day, for the session. Now coming back to it on February 20th, the Beatles were doing a live performance. Well, George Martin comes into the studio, and what he does is add a piano part to the middle 8 of the song. And he did it on the studio's Steinway grand piano. And he used some studio trick here to get the sound that he was looking for. He recorded it at half speed. The EMI BTR3s run at 7.5 inches per second and 15 inches per second. Martin recorded it at half of the running speed. So the normal speed for these was 15. He ran it at 7.5, recorded the part octave lower than he wanted it to play back, but it allows you to articulate better. And then on playback, it's in the right pitch and at the right speed for the song. So that's the half-speed recording trick that is well associated with Martin in this era. That took the song to take 16, and that was all that was required for it. On February 25th, it was mixed. We don't know the number of the remixes they took to do it, but both a stereo and mono remix were created on that date, and we have the song that we love.
Next up, we have Anna, Go to Him, an Arthur Alexander song.
Anna was the 7th song that was recorded during the February 11th session. Pretty straightforward. The backing track had Lennon on the Gibson J160 acoustic guitar and lead vocals, McCartney on bass and backing vocals, Harrison on electric guitar and backing vocals, and Starr on drums. They had 2 false starts of it, takes 1 and 2, and then take 3 was a complete performance. And the only performance that they needed. Amazing. The song's done. They didn't have any overdubs. They went straight to mix with this version on February 25th. Couldn't have been nicer, and what a beautiful song.
So 4th on the album is Chains, written by Goffin and King, who were probably just kids themselves when they wrote it. And I read that this was obviously a hit for the Cookies in '62, but was a favorite song to be covered by Liverpool bands.
Yeah, the Beatles loved American music, and a lot of critics later on feel like part of the Beatles' success was in reintroducing the U.S. to their own songs. And the Brill Building writers, Goffin and King, were absolutely some favorites of the Beatles. They loved the girl group music, like the Shirelles and that sort of thing. They loved the Great American Songbook. So and had excellent taste in the covers that they chose to do. Chains was the 9th song recorded on the February 11th session. It had Harrison on electric guitar and lead vocals, Lennon on electric guitar, harmonica and backing vocals, and McCartney on bass and backing vocals, and then Starr on drums, of course. They did 4 takes of the song, but they only really needed to do 1 because take 1 was the version that we hear in the remix. Again, those remixes recorded on February 25th. So you can't get any better than that. And they certainly must have had the song in their hearts to get it done and get a version done that we all love in just 1 take.
Next up is Boys with Ringo singing.
Yeah, and did not bother to change the gender of the track to do it. This was a girl group track, Boys.
The Shirelles.
Yeah, the Shirelles. So there you go. Didn't even bother to change it up. And it's kind of cool, that angle of it, right? That we're talking about boys, and I imagine that a lot of fans, and Ringo was super popular in the U.S. I think he was probably the most popular Beatle early on in the U.S. for all sorts of reasons, I guess. But I can imagine him singing about boys and fans. The female fans adopting that, thinking about, singing about them, the boys, because the Beatles were affectionately called that, the boys. So here we go with Ringo's star turn, forgive the pun, Boys, the 8th song that was recorded during that February 11th session. The backing track had Starr on drums and lead vocals, Lennon on guitar, McCartney on bass and backing vocals, and Harrison on guitar and backing vocals. Guess how many takes it took? There's a pattern going on here. 1 take and they're done. And maybe that's all Martin thought that Ringo had in him as far as vocals goes. We'll never know. But 1 did the trick, and we've got a song. mixed again on February 25th with a batch of others.
So next up is Ask Me Why. Ask Me Why was the B-side of Please Please Me. And as you were saying earlier, was one of 4 songs that were originally recorded as the first 2 singles, which if they hadn't been hits, they wouldn't have even been afforded the opportunity to record the full album. So tell us a little bit about Ask Me Why.
Yeah, Ask Me Why it's interesting to me that the Beatles even got the B-sides of their singles.
That is powerful. For those people watching, to understand why Jerry's saying that, is that when a single came out, the A-side and the B-side paid the same amount. Even though you may be hearing the A-side on the radio, when you physically went and spent your dollar, your 79p, I think, when I bought my first single, when shows you how old I must be. Anyway, so when you went and bought that single, half the money went to the A-side and half the money went to the B-side. So, you could have a B-side of a massive hit single and be a writer of the B-side and make a lot of money.
Again, Brian Epstein, whatever he figured out, I don't know that he was that astute about the economics of the record industry, but that he figured out that they were able to get the A and the B sides of these initial records and kind of set that standard. A brilliant managerial move. Ask Me Why was not part of the February 11th session. It was actually recorded on November 26, 1962, as part of the Please Please Me single when they were working on that. And it was recorded in Studio 2, Martin producing, so pretty much everything was consistent with what they would be doing later. The backing track had Lennon on the Gibson J160E, acoustic electric guitar and singing lead vocals, McCartney on bass and backing vocals, and Harrison on the duo jet and backing vocals, and Starr on drums. Lennon and Harrison were still in this era. They were on those JMI Vox AC 30-6 twin amplifiers. So again, no change in the gear that's going on, even though this is done earlier than the sessions we've been talking about so far. 6 takes was all that were required. There were no overdubs required on the song. It was mixed on November 30th, 1962, for use in the single, and that single was released on January 11th, 1963.
Next up is the title track of the album, the first #1 single that the Beatles ever had, Please Please Me. And I think for people to understand, in Britain at the time, we didn't have like one chart like we've had in the last maybe few decades. There was the New Musical Express, which is the NME, and Melody Maker chart, which were definitely credible charts. And that, of course, was a #1 single in both of those charts.
Yeah, Please Please Me absolutely put the Beatles on the map. And as they were recording it, famously, when they finished the recording, George Martin tells them, boys, you've got your first #1. It's an absolute masterpiece of a little rock and roll song, and really set the form for both the Beatles in their early era and a lot of the tone of the Mersey sound that was being developed through Brian Epstein's stable of artists, including Billy J. Kramer and Jerry and the Pacemakers. It's a terrific track and well-deserved #1.
However, what's interesting is when they put out that #1s album, Please Please Me wasn't on it, because the record retailer chart, which ended up morphing into the UK singles chart, actually had them at #2. And because that was what became like the highly regarded chart that everybody looked to, they decided not to consider it a #1 single. But I don't know. Good enough for me.
I don't know either. Good enough for me too. Yeah, let's talk about how it was made. Please Please Me was recorded not in the February 11th session, but it was recorded much earlier, November 26, 1962, at EMI in Studio 2. The backing track for this one had Lennon on his Rickenbacker, had Harrison on his duo jet, McCartney on his Hofner, and Starr on the Premier drums. They did 18 takes of the song, and we don't exactly know which ones were used in the final version of it, but we have a clue because ultimately they compiled takes 16, 17, and 18. So one of those, or all of those, were considered good enough to be assembled eventually. After take 18, they moved on to overdubs, and those included vocals, backing vocals, and harmonica. Once that was done on the track, they created an edit piece for the song, and the piece was focused on the ending of the song. Now, the way the song was recorded, we had the backing track initially recorded on track 1 of the twin track, and then the next work that was done was the vocals as an overdub onto track 2. When they're doing this next piece, the edit piece, they record this across both track 1 and 2 of the twin track. So we go, if you can imagine this in your head, and you can hear it in some of the stereo versions of it, where you have distinct placement of backing track and vocals. But now when we get to the very end of the song, all of a sudden we've got something that feels like stereo. Kind of a crazy decision to make, but they made it. So after an edit of tracks 16, 17, and 18, with this edit piece, so 4 pieces of tape glued together, they had the finished version of Please Please Me.
So, first song on side B, another big hit. Their first hit, number 17 in the charts, Love Me Do.
Yeah, Love Me Do, really straightforward track. To make it work in the studio, they had to rearrange it. And initially, Lennon was singing the entire track. But when they wanted the harmonica part, didn't quite work out. And so all of a sudden, McCartney's got a vocal on it too. A pretty straightforward little song.
So going back to the B-side for a second, Ask Me Why, which was recorded by Ron Richards, produced by Ron Richards, it just reminded me that Gerry and the Pacemakers had cut How Do You Do It, which Ron had suggested for the Beatles to be a single, and ended up, of course, being a massive hit for Gerry and the Pacemakers.
Yeah, the Beatles did a full version of How Do You Do It and did a really good job on it. The Gerry and the Pacemakers version is very, very close in character. It makes sense. They were all both coming out of EMI, both recording for Parlophone. So it made perfect sense. But the Beatles were just not as enthusiastic about the track as they were about their own work. They were secure enough in their very early songwriting to believe that they had a better song, and that better song was "Love Me Do," that they thought should be their single.
I can also imagine they're playing in Hamburg, like night after night, working these insanely long sets, playing covers of incredible American hit songs. And then somebody comes in with this left of center cover. They're probably thinking, well, if we're going to do a cover, let's do one of those. There's also that as well, isn't there? Let's already do a song that we know is a hit. So, yeah, I can imagine the uncomfortableness of somebody trying to. Bands have through the decades have been in this situation. Somebody comes in and says, "Do this song." And if you don't have an emotional attachment to it, it's a tough one.
Yeah, absolutely. That aspect of the music industry hasn't changed a whole lot. You still find bands with major deals that will have a hit, and if the label seems to think they're running out of them, they throw a cover at them.
Yep.
And it's the record industry is, after all, about selling music. So if you got a sure bet, or you think you do, you usually cash that chip in. Love Me Do holds a special place in Beatle lore for a couple of reasons. One, it's the only track that had 3 drummers record it. The second is that it was one of just a couple of tracks that made a release that were only recorded in mono. They were recorded to the EMI BTR-2 tape machine. So as to the drummers, Pete Best was drummer number 1, and his version was done on June 6th in those initial recordings for EMI. Didn't turn out so well for Pete. He got booted from the band shortly after that. The next drummer to step in was Ringo Starr on September 4th, and here we get the first proper version of the song that's recorded. We've got Lennon on electric guitar and harmonica. We've got Harrison on acoustic guitar. We've got McCartney on bass and Starr on drums. The backing track was just the band. There was no vocals that were recorded with that. They did 15 plus takes of this. Not quite sure if there were more or not. These are some of the tapes that got trashed before 1966, before they were keeping everything that the Beatles ever recorded. But after the backing track was done on one of those takes, then they overdubbed vocals and hand claps, and that finished that version of the song. Unfortunately, for Ringo, George Martin wondered if it could be done better. And so on September 11th, they come back, and now we've got Andy White sitting in on drums. And Ringo is delegated a tambourine. So nothing else about the song changes, and nothing else about the way that the song is recorded changes. It's still recorded as the backing track, instrumental only, and then overdubs of the hand claps and vocals that are done. Ringo's version did get released. It was the mono single version of the song. So the single release in the UK was Ringo's version of the song. Andy White's version of the song as drummer was released on both the mono and stereo album. And if you weren't paying attention, how do you know which one Ringo played on and which one Andy White played on? If you hear a tambourine, it's Andy White. If you don't hear a tambourine, it's Ringo. There you go. Now, as to one of the tricks that came into this with the recording is, because it was recorded to mono and there was a stereo release, we got a problem, right? We need a stereo version of this. Well, the way that they created a stereo mix from a mono song was that they recorded the mono version to both tracks of a twin track machine, the BTR-3. And then they changed the equalization a little bit between track 1 and track 2, or the left and right channels. And that difference in equalization tricks us into believing that we're hearing a stereo signal. And they did that for this song and a song to come very soon.
Now, P.S. I Love You, which is the next song, is actually like a favorite for me for early Beatles. It's just there's something about it. I love the harmonies on it. I love the range of Paul, that P.S., that going up high on that, he says badly. It's a beautiful, beautiful song, and very sophisticated for a band on their first album.
Absolutely. What the Beatles demonstrated in their songwriting was an understanding of a lot of pop music forms. And this is going back to not only American pop, but back through the history of songwriting. They seem to have a pretty deep understanding of forms and what you could do with it, and a maturity well beyond their years as far as songwriters go. P.S. I Love You was still in the vein of the I, me, you sorts of songs that they were doing early on, but that's okay. Great tracks. I love P.S. I Love You as well. I think it's a clever song, and not only clever, it's just a solid little rock and roll song. So P.S. I Love You is another track that was not recorded on the February 11th session, but instead it was recorded with the song we just talked about, Love Me Do, on September 11th, 1962. This was another song that was recorded in mono, and this is a song that Ringo does not drum on. This is all Andy White. Every version of it you're going to hear is Andy White. Ringo was relegated to playing maracas on the track. So for those that are curious, Andy White was playing a 1956 Ludwig Black Diamond Pearl Buddy Rich super classic drum set. That sounds like an expensive drum set, right? Buddy Rich? Sounds like it to me. Took him 10 takes to get the backing track right. So even Andy White took 10 takes to get a song in the can, that pro drummer. But he did. And then backing track was just guitars, bass, drums, and maracas, no vocals. Then they overdubbed the vocals in a mono to mono superimposition. And that was that. The remix came right through. Once again, when for the purposes of the stereo release, they had to take that mono mix and send it to both tracks of a twin track machine of a BTR-3, and then with a change in equalization between the left and right channel, our perception as we hear it, helps us believe that we're hearing a stereo mix. And Warren probably has a much better idea of the full technical breakdown of why those changes in phase relationships cause us to believe that. But that's the way they did it.
So next up is a cover of the Shirelles song, Baby It's You, which, of course, one of the co-writers is the great Burt Bacharach.
Yeah, what a match made in heaven, the Beatles and Burt Bacharach. I just love the idea of it. Another girl group selection from the Beatles. They just absolutely loved that music and picked up on it. Their version of Baby It's You is fantastic, and again, a staple of their live show, and they do make very quick work of it. So we're done with our time traveling now, and we're back to the evening of February 11th, 1963, and Baby It's You was the 10th song that was recorded in that marathon session. The backing track had Lennon on guitar and lead vocals, McCartney on bass and backing vocals, Harrison on guitar and backing vocals, and Starr on drums. 3 takes of the song were attempted. Only takes 1 and 3 were complete, and take 3 was the keeper for the track. And that was all the work that they did on that evening. Now, on February 20th, George Martin comes back to the studio. The Beatles are doing a performance that on that evening, and he adds a Celeste from the studio's keyboard collection to the track, taking up takes 4 and 5 to add the Celeste part to it. He also tries an experiment with a grand piano on it, but that doesn't wash. So he sticks with the Celeste, which ended up being take 5 as a overdub again onto take 3. That was it. The song was complete with George Martin's addition, and very neat little mix on February 25th.
Next up is another favorite. I've always loved this song, Do You Want to Know a Secret? I think it's just everything about, the listen, do you want to know? It's got such the heaviest kind of Liverpudlian accent that I'd ever heard. Do you promise not to tell? Everybody's laughing at me at this moment, and I can see the keyboard warriors. That's the worst Liverpudlian accent ever. And quite frankly, it was. But it's a big favorite of mine. I always loved Harrison's voice. And look, let's be honest. I mean, one of the massive advantages the Beatles had over many, many bands was the fact that all 4 of them sung. They didn't always sing. They didn't sing all the songs. But you could put on an album and you'd at least get a couple of Harrison songs on every record, and then a Ringo song every now and then. And of course, you had 2 incredible lead singers in Lennon and McCartney. So, as a kid, when I first heard it, I just remember loving this song, loving the harmonies, the little background motifs. Everything about this is such a wonderful song.
Yeah, the thing that I love about Do You Want to Know a Secret from a songwriting perspective is that they do this trick that you find in classic songs like Somewhere Over the Rainbow, where there is an opening motif so that you never know how much I really love you, you never know how much I really care, that opens a song, is never repeated. It's truly an introduction to the track. And no one was doing that in pop music. And the Beatles do it. They're the Beatles pull something out of songwriting that's going back to the late 1930s and the early 1940s, and they're doing it on a contemporary rock album. It just blows my mind that they were that confident in what they were doing. And, absolutely the fact that they had 4 singers. Yes, Ringo could sing.
Yeah, Ringo could sing.
And then the fact that they blended so well together as vocalists. In some of this early stuff, when Lennon and McCartney are singing together, I challenge a lot of people to really tell when they're singing, who's doing what sometimes. They just worked so hand in glove with each other. Just brilliant. But yeah, Do You Want to Know a Secret? Cool song. So let's talk about that. Do You Want to Know a Secret was the 4th song recorded during the February 11th session. The backing track had Harrison on the Gibson J160E and singing lead vocals. Lennon also on a J160E, McCartney on bass, and Starr on drums. 6 takes of the song were required to get it right, and did a killer job with it. A very simple overdub of this, of backing vocals and Starr providing some percussion with his drumsticks, and the song's in the can. Pretty straightforward, pretty short work of it. Mixed again on February 25th in a Studio 2 session where they mixed a lot of the work for the recording.
So next up is A Taste of Honey. To be honest, became hits for other people like Acker Bilk in 63 and 65, Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, both as instrumentals. And I wasn't that familiar with it outside of the Beatles, quite frankly. So I did a quick bit of research here. And it actually was written by Bobby Scott and Rick Marlowe as an instrumental itself for the 1960 Broadway version of a 1958 British play called A Taste of Honey. So, and it was also made into a film of the same name in 1961. So I'm interested. I wonder if it was Paul, because he's admitted quite often that he was a big fan of like Broadway and musicals and stuff like that. So I wonder if this was a sort of a Paul song, a Paul love, if you like.
I could certainly see that. McCartney certainly had more of the background interest in Broadway, music hall, those kinds of song forms. Again, we were talking earlier about the American Songbook. These were things that were near and dear to McCartney's heart. Makes sense that they would come through Taste of Honey in that, out of his influence. It was a song they were playing in Hamburg. It's on the Star Club recordings that people might be familiar with. So it's a track that they had perfected. It made it easy for them to really nail it when it came to these very quick Please Please Me sessions. Remember, we're still in the same night of recording here. It's not, these aren't multiple sessions going on other than the singles. They are nailing song after song after song here in one marathon session at EMI. A Taste of Honey was the 3rd track that was recorded during the February 11th sessions. Backing track had McCartney on bass and lead vocals, Lennon on acoustic guitar and backing vocals, Harrison on electric guitar and backing vocals, and Starr on drums. They did 5 takes of the song, and take 5 was the best backing track that they were able to get done. And it was really straightforward. They only had one overdub to do on it, and that was McCartney double tracking his vocal parts during the I Will Be There vocal. That was it. And the song's in the can. February 25th was the mix for both the stereo and mono versions of it, along with a lot of other songs for the album.
The last Lennon and McCartney song on the record, There's a Place.
Yeah, this is another one where the harmony work just shines through, where there's those close harmonies where they're just, reaching for the sky for the whole track. And it's dramatic in that way. Beatles make short work of most of this stuff. There's a Place is no exception to that rule. As we get to the end of the album, we get to the beginning of the recording session on February 11th. There's a Place was the first song that was recorded on the February 11th marathon session. The backing track had Lennon on his electric guitar and lead vocals, McCartney on bass with lead vocals as well, Harrison on guitar with backing vocals, and Starr on drums. They did 10 takes of the backing track, but only 7 of the takes were complete. And that's not unusual, to have some breakdowns, of course. And they had a few with this one. Take 10 ended up being the keeper. Only needed one overdub, which was Lennon adding his harmonica work on the session. That took him up to take 13. So 3 takes of overdubs for Lennon to get the harmonica in place, and we're done. This was mixed as well on February 25th, along with most of the other songs for the album.
So, as the folklore goes, a whole album was recorded in slightly less than 13 hours, and probably even less than that if you think about it, because I'm sure they had a break to maybe eat a sandwich. But yeah, 10 a.m. start time, 10:35 p.m. they were done. And this, of course, would be the last song. This is a song I have talked about in other videos because lots of people talk about the Lennon's vocal on this. Lennon's vocal on this is like razor blades. It's got so much edge on it. And I often point out to people that, yeah, he had been singing on and off for, 12 or 13 hours during the day. And this was the last song he's recorded. So that "Shake Little B," that sounds to me like a man with a very tired voice pushing through with all of his energy. And it just gives such an emotive performance.
So at the end of the album and the end of the February 11th session, after 12 plus hours, we get to the last song, Twist and Shout. It's a big one. Lennon's voice is trashed, and yours would be too. He sang over the course of the day on over 70 vocal performances across all the different tracks that they recorded, either lead vocals or backing vocals. So just a lot of work. And you can imagine what your throat would be like after that. So he's sucking on Zoobs, I think they were, these lozenges to try to keep his throat lubricated to be able to get through the song. The backing track was Lennon on electric guitar and lead vocals, McCartney on bass and backing vocals, Harrison on guitar and backing vocals, and Starr on drums. Mercifully, it really only took him one take to get it right. Now, they recorded two. After take one was just slamming it, George Martin must have thought he wanted a safety, or maybe they could do it a little bit better. That's what producers will do every now and then. So they did record a take two, but they didn't need to. Take one had everything that they could have possibly wanted. They were just blown away with it. They were so excited about it that they did a mix of it that evening to be able to hear it and enjoy it. And we enjoy it all these years later.
So Jerry, thank you ever so much. That was a lot of fun. Everybody watching, please don't forget to come back, because we're going to do a With the Beatles next.